Hi, my name is Ethan Carter, and 4 days ago I was in Mexico running from one conference hall to another, building my career, planning my future. While I was gone, my parents made a choice that shattered everything I thought I knew about family. They sold my Ferrari, a $350,000 car I had worked years to buy, not because they needed money, not because they were desperate, but because my brother wanted a luxury vacation in Bora Bora with his girlfriend. When I landed back in Ohio, I expected to find my car waiting for me in the garage. The one thing that always felt like mine, the one thing I had built my life around. Instead, I found an empty space, tire marks still fresh on the concrete, and a note from my brother that said, "Best move Dad ever made. Enjoy Mexico. Bora Bora's insane." My father smiled when I confronted him, beer in hand, telling me I should be proud that my car had funded Daniel's happiness. My mother avoided my eyes, pretending dinner on the table mattered more than the truth. They thought I would stay silent like I always had. They thought I wouldn't fight. But what they didn't know was this: the Ferrari they sold wasn't theirs to sell. It had never been in their hands. And now they're about to learn what happens when the quiet son finally speaks. The air in Ohio always felt different when I came back from a trip. Colder, sharper, like the wind was trying to remind me where home really was. After 4 long days in Mexico, bouncing from conference halls to late-night networking dinners, I should have been exhausted. Instead, I felt wired, ready to sink into the comfort of routine. My mind wandered to the one thing that always grounded me. My car. That Ferrari 488 GTB was more than metal and paint. I had dreamed of it since I was 20 years old, staring at glossy posters taped to my dorm wall. At 34, I had it sitting in my garage, fire red and flawless. Every time I drove it, even just around the block, it reminded me that I had built something out of nothing. No favors, no handouts. Just work, sleepless nights, and stubborn faith. The Uber dropped me at the curb in front of my parents' old house, where I still kept the garage. It wasn't glamorous, just brick and shutters that had needed replacing years ago. But behind those doors sat my prize. I pulled my suitcase onto the cracked driveway, the wheels bumping against familiar grooves. The sun had already dipped low, turning the neighborhood into muted blues and grays. I hit the garage opener on my key fob. Nothing. The door didn't budge. Frowning, I tugged at the handle, but it was already unlocked. My pulse quickened. I pushed it up, and the sound of creaking metal echoed in the still evening. The space inside was hollow, empty. No shine of red paint, no low hum of an engine cooling after a run, just concrete oil stains and a single faint smell of gasoline hanging like a ghost in the air. My chest tightened. For a second, my brain tried to rationalize. Maybe I had loaned it out, maybe I had sent it for service. But no, I never let anyone touch it, not even family. I stepped inside, my sneakers crunching against a trail of grit. Faint tire marks curved across the floor like someone had peeled out fast. My breath clouded in the cold, shallow, and uneven. I felt lightheaded, like the oxygen in the room had been stripped away. Dragging my suitcase behind me, I stumbled into the kitchen. The light flickered when I flipped the switch, buzzing faintly. On the counter sat a folded scrap of notebook paper. My name wasn't on it, but the handwriting was familiar enough to twist my stomach. I unfolded it slowly, my hands trembling even before I read the words. "Best move Dad ever made. Enjoy Mexico. Bora Bora's insane, Daniel." I read it once, then again, the letters blurring as heat rushed into my face. The casual arrogance of it hit harder than any fist could. They hadn't stolen my car in the dead of night like strangers. They had sold it, my own blood smiling while they did it, and they wanted me to know. I leaned against the counter, the edges biting into my palms. Memories collided in my head, every late night I had worked to afford that car, every sacrifice I had made. And now in 4 days it was gone. Just gone. I forced myself to breathe, to slow down. Anger flared, then ebbed, replaced by something colder. Betrayal didn't scream. It didn't throw chairs, it just hollowed you out until you were a shell standing in your parents' kitchen staring at proof that you had been gutted from the inside. I picked up the paper again, smoothed out the creases. The pen strokes slanted with the same careless energy Daniel had always carried. He wanted me to know he was enjoying Bora Bora, using the money from the only thing in this world I had ever allowed myself to want, unapologetically. My Ferrari. The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual, each second dragging me deeper into the realization that this wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't some clerical error or misplaced favor. This was a choice. My father had approved it. My mother had looked the other way, and Daniel had toasted to it while boarding a flight with his girlfriend. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as sandpaper. My suitcase still sat by the door, forgotten. The silence in the house pressed down heavy, almost suffocating. I could hear my pulse in my ears, steady, slow, but relentless. I knew one thing in that moment with absolute clarity. This wasn't theft. This was betrayal, and betrayal never comes from strangers. It comes from the people who should have protected you the most. I folded the note neatly, slipped it into my jacket pocket, and stood still for a long time, staring into the emptiness where my Ferrari used to be. I drove through the neighborhood with the note burning in my pocket, headlights sweeping across houses that looked smaller than I remembered. My grip on the steering wheel was tight, but my face stayed calm. Too calm, like my body knew if I let go even a little, I might explode. The streets of Columbus felt colder that night, not just from the autumn air, but from the weight pressing against my chest. By the time I pulled into my parents' driveway, the porch light was on, flickering like it had for years. Nothing looked different. Same crooked shutters, same half-dead hydrangeas, same smell of damp leaves when I stepped out of the car. If I hadn't seen the empty garage, I might have believed nothing had changed, but everything had. Inside, the familiar scent of roast chicken and lemon cleaner hit me. My suitcase wheels bumped against the threshold, but I left it by the door and walked in. The TV was on low in the living room, some game show rerun flashing colors across the walls. Robert Carter sat in his recliner, one hand wrapped around a beer bottle, the other resting on the armrest like a throne. Linda was in the dining room setting silverware, her face calm, eyes fixed on her work. I didn't waste time. My voice came out steady, colder than I expected. "Where is my Ferrari?" Robert didn't flinch. He leaned back, lips curling into that smirk I had known my whole life, the kind that meant he thought he had won before I even started. That car helped Daniel and Sophia take the trip of a lifetime. Bora Bora, can you believe it? You should be happy for them. Happy. The word hit me like a slap. My jaw clenched, but I forced a smile that felt sharp and unnatural. My mother paused for a second, her hand hovering over a fork, then kept setting the table without looking up. I took a step closer to my father. "That car was never yours to sell." His eyes narrowed. He took a slow sip of beer, then let the silence hang between us like smoke. He wanted me to break, to yell, to prove him right about me being the dramatic one. I stayed quiet. The ticking clock on the wall filled the room louder than any words. Finally, he scoffed. "You're barely ever here. Always flying out chasing those coding jobs, bragging about software no one understands. You think owning a car makes you a man of the family." I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I forced it down. Every part of me screamed to shout back, to remind him of every night I had worked, every sacrifice I had made without their help. But instead I spoke calmly. That Ferrari was mine. Not yours, not Daniel's, mine. Linda finally moved. She set the last fork on the table, straightened it, then picked up the serving bowl without meeting my eyes. The silence from her was worse than any words. She had been my one hope for reason, the one person who might stop this madness, but she wouldn't even look at me. I turned back to Robert. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the room. You didn't just sell a car, you sold your son out. His smirk faltered just for a second before returning. He leaned forward, beer dangling from his fingers. Don't give me that look, Ethan. Family sacrifices. That's how it's always been. I let the silence settle, the weight of his words pressing heavier than the walls around us. My chest ached, but my face stayed calm. Inside it felt like a knife twisting deeper with every second. Linda carried the bowl to the table and whispered, "Dinner is ready," as if nothing had happened, as if the room wasn't burning down around us. I didn't sit. I didn't eat. I stood in the doorway staring at the two of them, the smell of chicken filling my lungs until I felt sick. They had done it together, one smirking, one silent, and Daniel thousands of miles away laughing on a beach I had unknowingly paid for. My father raised his beer in a mock toast to Daniel, finally living life. The glass clinked softly against the armrest as he drank. The sound echoed louder in my ears than anything else. I didn't answer. I didn't even blink. I just let the silence stretch until the air grew heavy and brittle. Then I spoke, each word clipped and certain. That car was never yours. The smirk faltered again. My mother's hand trembled as she set down the bowl. The room had shifted. They knew I wasn't here to argue. I was here to end something. I turned, walked to the door, and stepped outside into the night air. The chill hit me harder than before, but it cleared my head. The porch light flickered behind me, and inside I could still hear the faint hum of the TV, the clink of a fork, the whisper of two people pretending nothing was wrong. But I knew better. The garage had been empty, and so had their excuses. The next morning I parked outside the Franklin County Clerk's office. The kind of squat government building that always smelled faintly of paper and stale coffee. The fluorescent lights inside hummed overhead. As I pushed through the glass doors, my hands buried deep in my jacket pockets to keep from shaking. I told myself it was just the cold, but it wasn't. The lobby was quiet, a few people waiting with numbered slips, some shuffling papers with the resigned patience only bureaucracy could demand. I walked to the glass counter, the clerk behind it, a young woman with sharp eyeliner and nails that clicked against the keyboard. I cleared my throat, trying to keep my voice even. I need a copy of a recent transaction. Vehicle sale, Ferrari 488 GTB, registered under an LLC in my name. She slid a clipboard toward me. ID. I handed her my driver's license, the photo of me smiling stiffly under DMV lighting, staring back with a kind of cruel irony. She tapped at the keys, the clatter echoing in the room louder than it should have. After a minute she frowned, then printed out a small stack of papers and slid them under the glass. Here you go. Transaction closed last week. I took them with both hands, fingers gripping harder than I meant to. I walked to a bench off to the side, the kind that dug into your back, and sat down. My hands moved slow, careful, like I was afraid the pages might cut me if I turned too fast. There it was. My name, Ethan Carter, sprawled across the signature line. The tilt of the E, the curve of the C, almost perfect. Almost. I stared closer, my pulse hammering. There was hesitation in the strokes, a stutter in the ink where my pen never would have paused. My stomach turned as my eyes slid to the notary section. Name of notary, Linda Carter. Relationship to signer, mother. The letters blurred. I blinked hard, but they didn't change. Linda Carter. My mother's name sitting on an official document like a brand seared into my chest. I knew she wasn't a notary. She had never been one. If she had, she would have told me, bragged about it to her church friends, posted it on Facebook like every other little certificate she collected. But here it was stamped and signed. The paper shook in my hands. I could almost hear her voice from the night before, soft and steady, "Dinner is ready," as if nothing had happened. My own mother, the person I had counted on to pull me back when my father pushed too far, had written herself into the fraud. She hadn't just looked away, she had helped make it real. I folded the papers not neatly this time, but with a roughness that crumpled the edges. My chest felt hollow, but my arms trembled with a heat that wanted to break something. I pressed my palms flat against my knees, forced myself to breathe slow, to stay still. Rage was easy, proof was better. I stood and walked back to the counter. The clerk looked up, her nails still tapping idly against the desk. "Quick question," I managed. "This notary, Linda Carter, do you have her license number on file?" She leaned closer, scanned the page, then frowned. "There's no license number listed, which is odd. Hang on." She typed faster, the screen reflecting in her eyeliner. After a moment, she looked up. "Are you sure she's a notary?" "She's not." My voice came out flat, certain. The girl squinted. "Then someone signed the registry with her name." The words landed like stones in my chest. "Signed the registry." Which meant someone had gone further than just copying a name. They had fabricated her role, her credentials, her authority. Either she had signed it herself knowing it was a lie, or someone had used her name to build the fraud. Both answers felt like a blade turning inside me. I thanked the clerk, my voice clipped, and stepped outside. The cold air hit me hard, sharper than it had the night before. The papers crackled in my hand as I slid them back into my jacket pocket. Cars passed on the street, ordinary people heading to ordinary lives, while mine was unraveling piece by piece. I leaned against the brick wall of the building, the texture rough against my shoulder. Memories churned, unbidden, small details I had never thought twice about. My mother standing in my study years ago, asking to borrow a stapler while I fixed her tire gauge in the garage. She had been in there longer than she needed to be. Back then I thought nothing of it. Now the image twisted sinister in hindsight. I closed my eyes and let the cold seep into me, numbing the fire in my chest just enough to think. The truth wasn't just about my father's smirk or Daniel's arrogance. The truth was that my mother had chosen her side, and it wasn't mine. I pushed off the wall, walked to my car, and slid into the driver's seat. The documents weighed heavy in my pocket, heavier than steel. I sat there for a long moment, staring through the windshield at nothing, the engine still sent. The betrayal had roots deeper than I wanted to admit, and I knew this was only the beginning. I gripped the steering wheel and let my eyes fall shut, and somewhere in that silence the years peeled back like old paint. It was 2010 again, and I was 21, sitting at the worn oak table in my parents' kitchen, with a manila folder in front of me. Inside it was a statement from the savings account my grandfather Henry had left for me. I had checked it 3 times already, each time running my finger over the numbers that looked like possibility. Enough for a down payment on a car, not just any car, but the first step toward the dream I had carried since high school. A used sports car, modest compared to what I wanted one day, but mine. The house smelled of coffee that morning, my mother humming softly as she wiped down the counters. My father sat across from me, sipping his mug with that familiar air of impatience, like everything I said was an inconvenience. Daniel walked in half awake, hair messy, his phone already glued to his hand. I told them I wanted to use the fund. My voice shook, but not from doubt, from excitement. I wanted them to see it too, to share in the thrill that something I had worked toward could finally begin. I explained how I had already scouted a car in Cincinnati red paint a little faded, but the engine strong, the kind of machine I could restore piece by piece. My father didn't smile. He set his mug down hard enough that a drop spilled over the rim. That money's spoken for Ethan. The words stopped me cold. I looked at my mother, but she only busied herself with the sponge scrubbing at a spot that wasn't there. Daniel shifted uncomfortably before smirking. Dad said it's for my tuition. I blinked at him. Tuition. For the private college he had applied to at the last minute because his friends were going, not because he had earned it. I looked back at my father, waiting for some explanation. Your brother needs an education. That car will always be there. I remember how my throat tightened, the words catching before I could even protest. Grandpa left that fund for me. I barely whispered it, more to myself than to them. My father leaned forward, eyes sharp. He left it for this family, and this family decides how to use it. Daniel grinned, already tapping on his phone, no doubt telling someone that his future was secured, that once again things had landed in his lap without him lifting a finger. My mother finally turned, her expression soft but empty. Ethan, you're smart. You'll figure it out. The kitchen spun for a moment. I had thought that account was my anchor, a sign that my grandfather believed in me and my future. But in a single morning it was gone, siphoned away for someone else's comfort. I didn't argue. I didn't slam my fists on the table or shout. I just sat back, hands pressed against my thighs to keep them steady, and nodded like I understood. In truth, I felt something split inside me. That was the first time I realized what I was to them. Not the firstborn son with dreams worth protecting, not the one they wanted to invest in. I was the fallback, the one who would manage on his own. The one who would stay quiet while they handed my future to Daniel. I left the table that morning without finishing my coffee. Outside the air was sharp, the kind that bit at your lungs, but it felt cleaner than inside that house. I walked down the block, my hands shoved deep in my jacket pockets, and promised myself I wouldn't forget. The memory snapped back into the present with a force that made my chest ache. Sitting there in my car outside the clerk's office, I could still feel the sting of that morning, still hear my father's voice, dismissing my dream as if it were nothing more than childish fancy. I started the engine, the hum filling the silence around me. The papers in my pocket were proof of the latest betrayal, but the truth was it had started long before. Back then, I told myself it was sacrifice, that being the strong one was noble. Now I knew better. Sacrifice was just another word they used to strip me of what was mine. I pulled out of the parking lot and drove slowly down Broad Street, the buildings passing in a blur. My hands were steady now, the fire cooled into something sharper. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the quiet son holding the weight of family peace. I felt like a man who had been played too many times and was finally ready to stop pretending. The road stretched out in front of me, long and gray under the winter sky. And I knew this fight had been waiting for me since the day they stole that first car that never was. Now they had stolen the one I built with my own hands. And this time I wasn't going to let it go. That night I sat in my apartment with the stack of forged documents spread across the table, the hum of the refrigerator filling the suns. The city outside was quiet, a few car horns in the distance. But inside my walls it felt like a storm was gathering. I opened my laptop, ready to dig deeper, when a new email appeared at the top of my inbox. The subject line read, "I shouldn't be telling you this." My first thought was spam, some phishing attempt, but something made me click. The body of the email was short. The sentences rushed, almost nervous. "I don't want to be involved in this anymore. But you need to know. Daniel bragged that you would never catch on to the sale. I have a recording. My breath caught. My hands hovered over the keyboard before I scrolled down. There was an attachment, an audio file no longer than 45 seconds. My chest tightened as I clicked. The sound was muffled at first, like it had been recorded from a phone shoved into a pocket, then clearer. Daniel's voice unmistakable, carrying that smug energy I knew too well. That Ferrari is just a toy. Now he gets to worry about lawyers while I'm watching sunsets in Bora Bora. In the background, Sophia laughed light and careless, as if mocking me from 1,000 miles away. I pressed pause, then play again, the words sinking deeper each time. Ferrari is just a toy. Now he gets to worry about lawyers. I stared at the screen, my reflection faint in the glass. For a moment I couldn't move. The documents from the clerk's office were proof enough, but hearing his voice, hearing the casual way he dismissed everything I had built, burned hotter than anything written on paper. I leaned back in my chair, the wood creaking beneath me, and gripped the phone tight in my hand. My knuckles went white, veins rising against the skin. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was arrogance, loud and careless, the kind that dared me to fight back. I saved the file, copied it twice, uploaded it to a drive I kept for safe storage. If Daniel thought he was untouchable, he had no idea how far I was willing to go. The email had no signature, no name, just a burner address, but I didn't need to guess who had sent it. Sophia had always looked at me with a mix of pity and guilt when we crossed paths. She had been drawn to Daniel's charm, but had seen the cracks sooner than anyone. If she had turned on him, it meant even she couldn't stomach the lies anymore. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, but I didn't feel tired. I opened the file again and let Daniel's laughter pour into the room until it made my skin crawl. Each word sharpened into resolve. They thought I would stay quiet. They thought silence was my role, the steady brother who never raised his voice, never pushed back. They were wrong. I stood pacing the length of the apartment, my footsteps heavy against the hardwood. I remembered the look on my father's face earlier, that smug tilt of his head, the way he raised his beer as if to toast Daniel's vacation. I remembered my mother's silence, the way she kept her eyes fixed on the forks instead of me. And now Daniel's voice layered on top of it all, mocking me from paradise. I stopped at the window, looking out over the street below. A couple walked hand in hand. A car passed slowly, headlights sweeping across the pavement. Ordinary lives untouched by the kind of betrayal tearing through mine. For years I had convinced myself I didn't need revenge, that walking away was enough. But some betrayals demanded answers. The phone buzzed in my hand, a text from a coworker reminding me of a meeting the next morning. I stared at it, then set the phone down. Work could wait. Nothing else mattered until I had ripped the mask off every lie my family had written with my name. I sat again, pulled the documents closer, and began highlighting the inconsistencies. Dates that didn't match, signatures that trembled, stamps without license numbers. Piece by piece, the puzzle formed. I wasn't just a son anymore. I was my own investigator, my own prosecutor. I played the audio one last time, let the sound of Daniel's voice etch itself into me. Then I closed the laptop, leaned back, and let the darkness settle. The fight had just begun, and I was ready. The next afternoon, my phone buzzed with a notification while I was at my desk, pretending to work through lines of code that blurred together. It was a message from my cousin Sam, just a single image dropped into our text thread with no explanation. At first glance, it looked like a screenshot of a group chat, one I had never seen before. The name at the top read "The Real Carters." My stomach sank as I opened it. The chat was full of messages, jokes, strung together like a comedy routine at my expense. One line from Daniel read, "Ethan is probably still thinking he's the golden boy. Wait till he finds out the car's gone." Another from my father said he'll sulk for a month, then he'll crawl back. Always does. But the one that hit hardest was written by my mother. Her words stared back at me in black and white. "His signature is easier than anyone's. Everybody believes me." I read it twice, then a third time, the letters blurring as if they might change if I just gave them the chance. My hands went cold. My chest felt like it was being crushed from the inside out. It wasn't just that they had taken the car or the money or even my trust. It was that they had turned me into a running joke, a character in their private theater of mockery. I messaged Sam back immediately. "What is this?" His reply came quickly. "Sorry, man, I didn't mean to send that. Thought it was funny at first, but maybe I shouldn't have." I stared at the screen, my pulse heavy in my ears. Funny. My family conspiring against me, erasing me with laughter, and he thought it was funny. I didn't reply. Instead, I set the phone down, then picked it back up again, my thumb hovering over the messages. The words were a knife, twisting deeper with every reread. For years I had believed my silence was strength, that letting things go made me bigger than them. But silence had bought me nothing but a seat at their table of ridicule. I stood and paced the room, the floor creaking under each step. Memories tumbled through my head, times when my father dismissed me with a wave, when Daniel stole credit and laughed, when my mother said, "Let it go," as if my feelings were something to be boxed and hidden. Now I knew they hadn't just ignored me. They had built a community around it, a private circle where my role was to be mocked, to be less, to be useful only as long as I could be exploited. The worst part was my mother's message. It was one thing for my father to sneer, for Daniel to brag, but my mother had been the one I thought might draw a line. She had been the one who tucked notes into my lunch when I was a kid, who hugged me before exams. Seeing her words now made me realize those gestures had been surface, while underneath she had been willing to betray me the same as the rest. I sank back into my chair, phone still glowing in my hand. My throat was tight, my jaw aching from how hard I clenched it. I could almost hear their laughter echoing through the screen, as if the group chat was alive and mocking me even now. A part of me wanted to storm to their house that second, slam the phone on the table, and demand answers. But I knew what would happen. My father would smirk. Daniel would laugh. My mother would look away. They would dismiss it the way they always did. And I would walk away carrying the weight alone again. So I didn't move. Not yet. I sat still, forcing myself to breathe, to let the sharp sting turn into something steadier. Proof was piling up. The forged documents, the audio recording, and now their own words. Piece by piece, I was building a case, not just against what they had done, but against who they were. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the heater kicking on. I stared out the window, the gray Ohio sky pressing low against the buildings. The silence no longer felt like a refuge, it felt like a strategy. I picked up my phone again and saved the screenshot to a hidden folder. My hand trembled, but not from fear. It was the tremor of resolve, the kind that came when a line had been crossed too far to ever be uncrossed. I closed my eyes, the image of the chat burned into the back of my mind. They thought they could reduce me to a joke, that I would play along like I always had. They thought I would stay quiet. The radiator clicked once sharp against the stillness, and I opened my eyes. Quiet had kept me caged for too long. This time it would be my weapon. I scrolled through my contacts, my thumb hesitating over a name I hadn't tapped in years. Jessica Lee. Back in college, she was the one person who could argue circles around professors and win. She had gone on to law school, then into real estate and contract law, while I buried myself in software. Our lives had drifted apart, but right then I knew she was the only person I could trust to look at what I had and tell me if I was losing my mind. I hit call. The line rang 3 times before her voice came through sharper, more confident than I remembered. Ethan Carter, it has been forever. I exhaled a shaky breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Jess, I need your help. It's personal. There was a pause on the line. She must have heard the strain in my voice because her tone softened. Send me everything you've got. I'll clear my evening. I spent the next hour scanning the forged documents, the fake notary, the group chat screenshot, even attaching the audio file. My hands shook as I hit send. 10 minutes later, she called back. Ethan, do you know what an LLC is? Of course. Limited liability company. My grandfather set one up years ago for his rental properties. Why? Because in 2015 he set one up specifically for your assets. She flipped through papers on her end. I could hear the rustle. Henry Carter Family Holdings. He placed that Ferrari under the LLC when it was purchased. You are the sole beneficiary and managing member. I froze, staring at the phone as if her words might burn through the screen. Jess, are you saying they had no right to sell it? No right at all? Every transaction has to be signed by you, notarized by a licensed notary, and filed with the state. Your father, your brother, your mother, none of them can bypass that. She took a breath. Ethan, this is outright fraud. The word echoed in my ear. Fraud. I thought back to the smirk on my father's face, the laughter in Daniel's voice on that recording, the casual cruelty of my mother's text. They hadn't just betrayed me. They had broken the law. I rubbed my forehead, my mind spinning. How solid is this? If I push, will it hold up in court? Stronger than they realize, Jess said without hesitation. I've reviewed the operating agreement, Clause 4.2b. No asset can be sold or transferred without your explicit signature. Anything they did is null and void. For the first time in days, something like relief flickered in my chest. Not hope, not yet, but a glimmer of ground beneath my feet. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. Thank you, Jess. Don't thank me yet, she warned. This could get ugly. If they forged your name once, they will not hesitate to twist the narrative. Be ready for a fight. I thought of Daniel sipping cocktails in Bora Bora, of my father raising his beer like a toast, of my mother setting forks on the table without meeting my eyes. I pictured the group chat, their words etched like scars. I was ready. I heard Jessica shuffle papers again. I can start drafting a litigation hold. That will freeze any accounts connected to the LLC. Do you want me to move now? Not yet. I need to gather everything. When we move, I want it airtight. Silence hung for a moment, then she said quietly, I always knew you were tougher than them. Maybe it's time they learn it too. After the call ended, I sat there in the glow of my laptop, the hum of the city outside my window. For the first time since I saw that empty garage, I felt the smallest spark of control return to me. I reached for the documents again, running my finger over the fake signature of my name. They thought this was just about a car. They had no idea what they had awakened. I slid the papers back into a folder, marked it with a thick black pen, and placed it on the table where I could see it every time I walked by. It wasn't just paper anymore. It was a weapon. And this time I wasn't holding it alone. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a message from Tyler Brooks, an old friend from the Columbus Car Club. Tyler was the kind of guy who always had a camera in hand, catching angles of chrome and steel the rest of us overlooked. We hadn't talked much since my life turned into late nights and software launches. but his name lighting up my screen made me pause. "Check this out," the message read. Attached were half a dozen photos. My stomach twisted as I swiped through them. Daniel grinning ear to ear, one arm draped around Sophia, the other gripping the wheel of my Ferrari. The shots weren't subtle either. He had pulled up outside a crowded bar in the short north, the car glowing under neon lights like a trophy. In one picture, he stood on the curb, sunglasses on at night, holding the keys high while people circled around, snapping their own photos. The arrogance rolled off him in waves, and all I could see was my work, my years, my blood reduced to his prop for attention. Tyler's next message came quick. "Dude's been showing off for days, thought you should know." I didn't reply right away. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, my pulse pounding harder with every second. I saved the photos to the same folder that held the documents, the audio, the group chat. Another piece of evidence. Another nail in their coffin. That evening, while I sat in my apartment staring at those images, another notification lit my phone. This time it wasn't private. It was public. A video had surfaced on Instagram, reposted by a local nightlife page. The caption read, "Luxury life, thanks Dad." And there was Daniel, my brother, leaning against the Ferrari with a drink in his hand. Sophia laughing beside him. He revved the engine twice, loud enough to drown out the crowd's cheers, then shouted, "Family first, right?" I watched it twice, bile rising in my throat. The comments had already started pouring in. "Must be nice living off someone else's dime. Isn't that his brother's car? Classic trust fund kid." I scrolled further. On one of the big car forums, the clip had been shared with a thread title that made my chest tighten. "When your ride isn't really yours." The responses were merciless. One user wrote, "I've seen Ethan at meets for years. Guy worked his ass off for that Ferrari, and this clown is parading it like he earned it." Another comment hit harder. "Some families are poison. This guy's about to learn karma doesn't care about your vacations." The thread kept growing, post after post, dissecting Daniel's arrogance. Sophia's complicit smile, the way my father's name slipped casually into his bragging. "Luxury life, thanks Dad." The words turned into a punchline across the community, repeated and twisted until it became a brand of shame. I leaned back, my hands trembling, not from anger this time, but from something darker, heavier. For years, my family had mocked me in private, hidden their betrayal behind closed doors. Now their arrogance had spilled into the world, and the world was laughing back at them. My phone buzzed again. Tyler had sent a final message. "People are starting to put the pieces together." I didn't tell them anything, but they're not stupid. I typed back slowly. "Don't say a word, just watch." I set the phone down and stared out the window. The city lights blurred against the glass, and for the first time since this began, I felt the tide shifting. It wasn't just me holding the weight anymore. The public had seen it, and they weren't going to let it go. Daniel had always thrived on attention, on being the center of the room. Now the spotlight was turning, and it was exposing every lie, every false smile, every stolen credit. I knew him well enough to imagine the crack in his grin when the jokes turned against him. I opened the video one more time, let it play with the volume low. His laugh grated against my ears, hollow and careless. I pressed pause, froze the frame on his face as he leaned against the Ferrari. Then I shut the phone off, slid it across the table, and let silence fill the room. The world had begun to see Daniel for what he was. A parasite feeding on the work of others. And for the first time, I didn't need to lift a finger. They were doing the work for me. The air in the apartment felt lighter. Not free, not yet, but shifting. Karma had started to circle, and all I had to do was let it find its way. The summons came on a gray Thursday morning, slid under my apartment door in a thick envelope with the courthouse seal. I tore it open at the kitchen table, the paper crisp in my hands. Mark Davis, the owner of a luxury showroom downtown, was filing a suit against me. His claim was simple. He had purchased the Ferrari in good faith with proper paperwork signed by me. The words stung like acid. By the time I walked into the courtroom a week later, my stomach was tight, but my face gave nothing away. The walls were lined with heavy wood panels, the kind meant to intimidate, and the flag in the corner drooped under fluorescent light. Mark Davis stood on the opposite side, a man in his 50s with a polished suit and an expression of weary self-righteousness. He didn't look at me once. The judge entered and the proceedings began. Mark's attorney wasted no time. He rose, his voice smooth and practiced. Your Honor, my client purchased the Ferrari 488 GTB from Ethan Carter with a signed bill of sale. He presented the documents confidently, sliding them across to the bench. I kept my eyes forward, but my jaw clenched when I saw the papers in the judge's hands. My name was there in black ink. The strokes almost perfect, but I could see it immediately. The hesitation on the curve of the E, the sharp angle on the T. It was the same forgery I had held in the clerk's office. Mark's attorney pressed on. My client acted in good faith, paid the agreed amount, and has since been harassed with accusations of fraud. This case is about protecting honest business practices. The words hung in the air like poison. Honest business practices. As if honesty had been anywhere in sight when my family signed my name away. Jessica rose calmly, her suit sharp, her presence steady. Your Honor, the Ferrari in question was never under Mr. Carter's sole name. It has been owned by an LLC since 2015 with Ethan Carter as the sole managing member. Any transfer of ownership requires his notarized signature. She slid her own stack of documents to the clerk, the rustle of paper loud in the quiet room. The judge looked over the papers, flipping slowly. Mark's attorney tried to interrupt, but Jessica didn't let him. Furthermore, we have the original car title registered to the LLC, and we have exemplars of Mr. Carter's authentic signature for comparison. The supposed signature on the bill of sale is inconsistent, clearly a forgery. I glanced at Mark then. His jaw twitched, but his face stayed composed. He wasn't the mastermind here, just another opportunist who thought he could cash in on someone else's arrogance. The judge frowned, leaning back in his chair. He shuffled the papers, set them down, then looked at both sides. I am not prepared to issue a ruling today. Given the conflicting claims, the Ferrari will be held in impound at the county police facility until the matter is resolved. My heart sank at the words. Held, my car, my blood and years and sweat was going into a cage while the liars walked free. I felt the weight of the moment pressing against my chest, the silence in the room broken only by the scratch of the clerk's pen. Mark's attorney smiled faintly as if he had already won. Jessica placed a hand lightly on my arm, steadying me before I could react. This isn't over, she whispered. The gavel struck once sharp against the wood and the hearing adjourned. The shuffle of shoes echoed as everyone filed out. I walked slowly, each step heavy, but my mind burned with clarity. For a moment it looked like I had lost, like their scheme had pushed me into a corner. But I knew better. This wasn't the end. It was the opening move, and they had no idea how much further I was willing to go. The invitation came on a Sunday afternoon, a short text from my mother that read, "Dinner at 6, come by." No question mark, no explanation, just the kind of directive she used to send when I was still a boy living under their roof. For a moment I almost ignored it, but something in me wanted to see their faces, to stand in the same room and watch them squirm. When I pulled into the driveway that evening, the porch light was already on, glowing warm against the fading daylight. The house looked unchanged, the shutters crooked, the hydrangeas overgrown, the wind chimes clinking off-key against the window frame. I walked inside, the familiar smell of pot roast and lemon cleaner settling over me like a blanket I wanted to throw off. In the dining room, the table was set. My father sat at the head, beer already in hand. His face calm but unreadable. My mother hovered with a dish towel, smiling faintly as if this were any ordinary Sunday dinner. Daniel lounged in his chair, tan, still fresh hair styled, a grin spreading across his face when he saw me. Bora Bora was insane, he said, his voice loud enough to fill the slants. Beaches like you wouldn't believe. You should try living a little, Ethan. I sat without a word, pulling a thick folder from my bag and placing it on the table between us. The sound of it hitting wood made Daniel's grin falter for a second. My father's eyes flicked toward it, then back to his beer. I kept my voice even. How many times have you signed my name? The room stilled. My mother froze with the towel in her hands. Daniel leaned back, crossing his arms with that same bravado that had carried him his whole life. Don't start with this again. You're not going to drag me into court. You don't have it in you. I opened the folder, slowly sliding a few papers across the table. Bills of sale, notarized pages with my forged signature, copies of the LLC agreement. Their lies laid out in black and white. My father didn't reach for them. He just stared, jaw-tight, eyes narrowing. I looked at Daniel. My voice was calm, sharp. You think I won't? He smirked, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. You wouldn't dare. Family doesn't do that. Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't laugh about it in secret chats. Family doesn't forge signatures like it's a game. My mother's lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. She sank into the nearest chair, folding the towel neatly in her lap like that act alone might hold her together. I pulled out my phone, pressed play, and set it on the table. The audio filled the room. Daniel's voice laughing smug. That Ferrari is just a toy. Now he gets to worry about lawyers while I'm watching sunsets in Bora Bora. Sophia's laughter echoed behind him. The sound ended, leaving a silence so heavy it seemed to press down on all of us. Daniel's face drained of color. He looked at me, then at my father, searching for support that wasn't there. My father shifted in his chair, staring at the table, his smirk gone. My mother's hands trembled against the towel, her eyes cast down as if the wood grain might offer escape. For the first time, they had nothing to say. No excuses, no dismissive laughter, no words to twist the blame back on me. Just silence. I leaned forward, my hands flat on the table. You thought I'd stay quiet forever. You thought I wouldn't fight. But you underestimated me. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second a reminder of how far this had come. No one moved. No one spoke. For the first time in my life, I watched my parents look down. Not in judgment, but in shame. And Daniel, always loud, always reckless, sat still, his mouth shut, his eyes burning with fear he couldn't hide. I gathered the papers back into the folder, slid my phone into my pocket, and stood. The weight of the silence followed me as I walked to the door. For once, it wasn't mine to carry. It was theirs. The courtroom was full the morning the ruling came down, the kind of charged silence that settles when everyone knows something irreversible is about to happen. I sat at the plaintiff's table beside Jessica. The thick folder of documents stacked neatly in front of her, while across the aisle Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his chair. My parents sat behind him, their faces drawn and pale. Mark Davis wasn't even there this time, his attorney handling what was left of his crumbling claim. The judge cleared his throat and read from the papers in front of him. After review of the evidence presented, including the LLC agreement, the car title, and multiple instances of inconsistent and fraudulent signatures, this court finds the bill of sale for the Ferrari 488 GTB to be void. The words hit like a release valve, pressure draining from my chest all at once. Void, the false sale that had been the centerpiece of their arrogance, didn't exist anymore. The judge continued, his voice steady. Furthermore, the court finds sufficient evidence to refer charges of forgery and fraud against Daniel Carter, specifically in connection with the falsified bill of sale and notarization. Daniel's jaw tightened. He glanced back at my father for support, but my father wouldn't meet his eyes. Robert Carter, the judge said, pausing to look directly at my father, is referred to the State Banking Commission for investigation regarding the use of the vehicle's VIN number as collateral in loan applications. My father's face darkened, his hand tightening around the armrest. And Linda Carter, the judge went on, is referred to the county prosecutor's office for potential charges of false notarization. The name and license presented in evidence were found invalid. My mother gasped softly, her hands folding in her lap, her shoulders hunched as if the weight of the courtroom itself had fallen on her. As for the Ferrari itself, the judge said it shall be restored to the ownership of the LLC, with Ethan Carter as the managing member. If the vehicle cannot be recovered in its prior condition, damages equivalent to $350,000 plus accrued interest will be paid to the LLC. I closed my eyes for a second, steadying my breath. The car that had been ripped from me, mocked, paraded, was finally mine again in the eyes of the law. The gavel struck once. Court adjourned. The sound echoed through the room. Daniel stood abruptly, his face red, but the bailiff moved closer, a reminder of where he stood now. Sophia, who had sat stiffly in the back, slipped out quickly, her eyes fixed on the floor, leaving him to stand alone. Outside the courthouse, cameras had gathered, though none of them pointed at me. They were fixed on Daniel, his face caught mid-sneer, on my parents, shielding themselves as they pushed through the crowd. Within hours, the news had spread online. Forums lit up with the updates, screenshots of the judgment posted with gleeful captions. Luxury life, thanks Dad, became a punchline again, this time twisted, crueler, sharper. Daniel the fraud trended on Twitter threads, dissecting his arrogance with brutal precision. Photos of him leaning on the Ferrari, glass in hand, were pasted beside the court ruling, a before and after no one could mistake. By evening, Sophia's social media had been wiped clean of his face. No more beach sunsets, no more clinking glasses in Bora Bora, just a single post that read, "Lessons learned," accompanied by a blank background. In the group chat that had once carried their laughter, silence reigned. Sam texted me a screenshot the next morning. The real Carters had been deleted. For years they had mocked me behind my back, used my name, my savings, my trust, and laughed while I stayed quiet. Now the law had spoken, and so had the world. My father under investigation, my mother facing charges, Daniel branded publicly as the fraud he always was. I sat in my apartment that night, the city lights glowing through the blinds, and let it all settle. It wasn't victory I felt, not the kind with cheering or relief. It was heavier than that, deeper. Justice had arrived both in court and in the court of public opinion. And for once the silence I carried wasn't mine to bear. It was theirs. When the Ferrari was finally released back to me from impound, I drove it once around the block and pulled it back into the garage, shutting the door behind me. The car was mine again on paper and in truth, but it no longer felt like freedom. It had been tainted, dragged through their lies, stained with memories I didn't want to relive each time I turned the key, so I made a choice. I sold it. The money cleared within a week, and I flew to California. In Los Angeles, I walked into a dealership lined with machines that shimmered under the lights like predators. My eyes stopped on a brand new Ferrari 2024 crimson paint that seemed alive, engine specs that made my chest tighten with anticipation. I signed the papers under my own name, steady and clear, and when the salesman handed me the keys, it felt like reclaiming something much larger than a car. The first time I slid behind the wheel, I let the leather hug me. The new car smell sharp and clean, the controls waiting under my hands. I sat there for a long while, engine silent, listening to my own breath. My grandfather Henry had once told me when I was young that owning something wasn't about money, it was about meaning. He believed I was worth investing in, worth trusting. Now, sitting in a car I had chosen for myself, I finally believed it too. I drove the coastline until the sun dipped low, the ocean stretching endless and gold. Wind cut through the open window, the engine roared when I pressed the pedal, and for the first time in months I didn't feel the weight of betrayal on my shoulders. I felt alive. I had bought a small house near the water, nothing grand but sturdy and full of light. That evening I prepared dinner in the kitchen, simple dishes spread across a long wooden table. Jessica arrived first, dropping her bag by the door and laughing when she saw the view from the back porch. Tyler came not long after, carrying a bottle of wine, his grin wide as he teased me about finally living on the coast. A couple of colleagues I trusted joined us too. Faces that had never asked me for more than I could give, people who had stood steady when my own blood had failed me. We ate together, voices overlapping, the room filled with warmth and laughter. No hidden group chats, no smug smiles, no dismissive silence. Just respect, trust, and the kind of comfort that doesn't need explanation. At one point I stepped away from the table, carrying my glass to the driveway where my new Ferrari sat gleaming under the porch light. I ran my hand across the hood, felt the hum of power beneath the steel, and whispered a quiet thank you. Not to the car, but to the man my grandfather believed I could become. When I walked back inside, everyone was still talking, plates half empty, wine glasses clinking. I paused in the doorway, looking around at the people who mattered. No father, no mother, no brother. And for the first time I didn't feel the absence as loss. I felt it as freedom. Later that night, as the house grew quiet and the ocean breeze drifted through the windows, I sat down with a notebook and let the final words come. Family can betray you, but justice will not. I don't need them to prove my worth. I only need to drive the road that is mine. If it were you, would you forgive them or let them carry the weight of what they've done? Share your thoughts.